At 62, retired truck driver William Harper thought he had found his soulmate in beautiful 24-year-old Mira Singh. Until he read the text messages planning her future with another man. Messages that would cost her everything, including her life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to follow this shocking case as it unfolds, because what you're about to hear will change how you see online romance forever. But let's go back to where it all began. The house at 847 Maple Drive in Surrey, British Columbia, had been silent for too long. William Harper sat in his worn leather recliner, the same spot where he'd spent countless evenings since Margaret's funeral 18 months earlier. The television droned in the background, but William wasn't watching. His eyes were fixed on the framed photograph on the side table. Margaret smiling beside him at their 30th wedding anniversary, her gray hair perfectly styled, her eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that comes from a lifetime of shared memories. Now, at 62, those memories felt more like ghosts haunting the empty rooms of his ranch-style home. William's retirement from long-haul trucking had been forced upon him by a minor heart episode 6 months after Margaret's death. For 35 years, he'd driven across Canada's vast highways, finding peace in the endless roads and the steady hum of his engine. The solitude that once comforted him on those long drives now suffocated him within the walls of his suburban home. His 2 adult children, Sarah and David, lived across the country with families of their own. They called dutifully every Sunday, their voices carrying the practiced concern of grown children who loved their father but had moved on with their lives. Their conversations always ended the same way, gentle suggestions that he should get out more, maybe join a senior center, perhaps consider dating again. The idea of replacing Margaret had seemed impossible until the loneliness became unbearable. It was his neighbor, Helen Morrison, who first mentioned online dating. She'd found companionship through a website called internationalhearts.com after her husband passed away 3 years earlier. "William, you're a good-looking man with a lot to offer," she'd said over coffee one afternoon. "Margaret wouldn't want you to spend your remaining years alone." Helen showed him her profile, explaining how she connected with a gentleman from Italy who made her laugh for the first time in years. The concept seemed foreign to William, finding love through a computer screen, but the alternative was growing old in silence, and that prospect terrified him more than taking a chance on something new. Creating his profile took William weeks of careful consideration. He used a recent photo taken at Sarah's wedding, where he looked distinguished in his navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his blue eyes still bright despite the grief that had aged him. He described himself honestly, a retired truck driver, financially secure with his pension and Margaret's life insurance, owner of a comfortable home, looking for genuine companionship in his golden years. He wrote about his love of classic rock music, his small workshop where he restored vintage car parts, and his dream of traveling to places Margaret had always wanted to visit but never could due to his demanding work schedule. For months, William exchanged messages with several women, most of them North American widows in their 50s and 60s. The conversations were pleasant, but lacked the spark he'd hoped for. These women seemed content with casual companionship, dinner dates, movie nights, perhaps weekend trips to nearby cities. William wanted something deeper, someone who could make him feel alive again, someone who could fill the gaping hole Margaret's death had left in his chest. He was beginning to lose hope when Mira Singh's profile appeared in his matches. The photograph took his breath away. Mira was stunning in a way that seemed almost too perfect for an ordinary man like him. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders like silk, and her dark eyes held a warmth that seemed to reach through the screen and touch his lonely heart. She wore a simple blue dress that highlighted her petite figure, and her smile was genuine, not the forced expression he'd seen in so many other profiles. At 24, she was young, perhaps too young, but something about her drew him in despite the obvious age difference. Mira's profile described her as a university graduate from Mumbai, working as a customer service representative for an international company. She wrote eloquently about her desire to find a mature, stable man who could appreciate her traditional values while supporting her dreams of building a life in Canada. She mentioned her love of cooking, her close relationship with her family, and her belief that age was just a number when two hearts connected on a deeper level. Her messages to William were thoughtful and engaging, filled with questions about his life, his experiences, and his hopes for the future. Their first video call lasted 3 hours. Mira spoke with a gentle Indian accent that William found enchanting, and her intelligence was evident in every conversation. She asked about his trucking days, listening with genuine interest as he shared stories of cross-country adventures and the freedom he'd found on the open road. She told him about her work, her small apartment in Mumbai, and her dream of experiencing life in Canada, where she believed people had more opportunities to build meaningful lives. When she looked into the camera and smiled, William felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret's illness began: hope. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened through daily video calls and constant text messages. Mira shared photos of her daily life, preparing traditional Indian meals in her tiny kitchen, visiting temples with her family, studying English language books she'd bought to improve her communication skills. William found himself looking forward to these glimpses into her world, and he reciprocated by sharing his own daily routines, photos of his workshop projects, and pictures of the Canadian landscapes she said she longed to see in person. Their conversations ranged from philosophical discussions about life and love to playful exchanges about their favorite movies and music. The proposal came naturally after 6 months of courtship. During one of their evening video calls, Mira mentioned how difficult it was becoming to imagine a future without him in it. "William," she said softly, her eyes glistening with what appeared to be tears, "I know we come from different worlds, but my heart has never felt more home than when I'm talking with you." William's response was immediate and from the heart. He asked her to marry him, to come to Canada and build a life together, to help him remember what it felt like to love and be loved. When she said yes, her joy seemed so genuine that William's doubts about their age difference melted away. The paperwork for Mira's visa took 4 months to complete, during which their relationship continued to flourish. William sent money to help with the application fees and travel expenses, and he began preparing his home for her arrival. He painted the guest bedroom, bought new furniture, and even installed a spice rack in the kitchen after Mira mentioned her love of cooking traditional Indian dishes. His children were skeptical when he told them about his engagement, warning him about online scams and the possibility of being taken advantage of. But William was convinced that what he and Mira shared was real, and their concerns only strengthened his resolve to prove them wrong. The day Mira's flight landed at Vancouver International Airport, William arrived 3 hours early, too nervous and excited to wait at home. He wore his best suit and carried a bouquet of red roses, his hands trembling with anticipation. When she walked through the arrivals gate, even more beautiful in person than in her photos, William felt like the luckiest man alive. She ran into his arms with tears of joy, and for the first time since Margaret's death, William believed his life was beginning again rather than simply ending. The first month of marriage felt like a dream William had never dared to hope for. Mira transformed his quiet house into a warm home filled with the aromas of cardamom, turmeric, and freshly baked naan bread. She sang softly while cooking, her melodious voice drifting through the rooms like a gentle breeze that carried away years of loneliness. William would sit at the kitchen table, watching her graceful movements as she prepared elaborate Indian meals, marveling at how natural she looked in his space, as if she'd always belonged there. She was everything he had imagined during their months of video calls and more. Mira rose early each morning to prepare his coffee exactly the way he liked it, strong and black, and she would sit beside him on the porch, listening intently as he pointed out different birds visiting their backyard feeder. Her English was better than she had claimed, and their conversations flowed easily from topic to topic. She asked thoughtful questions about his trucking days, about Margaret, about his children, showing a genuine interest that made William feel valued and heard. In the evenings, Mira would curl up beside him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched television together. She seemed fascinated by Canadian culture, asking him to explain everything from hockey rules to local news stories. When Sarah and David called for their weekly check-ins, Mira would politely excuse herself to give him privacy, though she always asked afterward how his children were doing and whether they were happy. Her consideration touched William deeply, confirming his belief that he had chosen the right woman to share his remaining years. The physical intimacy between them was tender and fulfilling in ways William hadn't experienced since Margaret's illness began years earlier. Mira was affectionate but respectful, understanding that at his age, romance looked different than it had in his youth. She would hold his hand during their evening walks around the neighborhood, lean against him while they read together, and kiss him goodnight with a sweetness that made him feel like a young man again. William's neighbor Helen noticed the change immediately, commenting that he looked 10 years younger and seemed genuinely happy for the first time since Margaret's death. But as the second month began, subtle changes started appearing in their routine. Mira spent increasing amounts of time on her phone, claiming she was staying in touch with family back in Mumbai or researching Canadian customs online. She would excuse herself from their conversations to take calls in private, speaking rapidly in Hindi with what sounded like urgency or excitement in her voice. When William asked about these calls, she would smile and explain that her mother was worried about her adjustment to Canadian life, or that her sister needed advice about her own upcoming marriage. The first real red flag came during a trip to the local immigration office for Mira's permanent residency application. William had offered to accompany her, but she insisted on going alone, claiming the process would be boring for him and that she needed to practice her independence. When she returned home that afternoon, she seemed different, more confident, almost relieved, as if some weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was unusually affectionate that evening, preparing his favorite meal and being more physically intimate than she had been in weeks. William's unease grew when he noticed Mira had become secretive about her computer use. She had asked for his Wi-Fi password on her first day, explaining that she wanted to video call her family, but now she always closed the laptop screen when he entered the room. She claimed to be researching job opportunities or taking online English courses, but her explanations seemed rehearsed, lacking the natural spontaneity of her earlier conversations. The neighbors began making observations that planted seeds of doubt in William's mind. Mrs. Patterson from next door mentioned seeing Mira walking alone in the evenings, talking animatedly on her phone in what sounded like heated discussions. Tom Richards from across the street asked if everything was okay, saying he'd noticed Mira seemed upset during some of her phone conversations, sometimes appearing to be crying or arguing. William defended his wife, explaining that adjusting to a new country was stressful, but privately he began paying closer attention to her behavior. During their third month together, Mira announced that she wanted to take English classes at the local community college and possibly look for part-time work to help with household expenses. William was supportive, understanding that she needed purpose beyond their marriage, but he noticed that her enthusiasm for these activities seemed to overshadow her interest in spending time with him. She would disappear for hours, claiming to be at the library studying or meeting with potential employers, but she never provided specific details about her activities. The change in their physical relationship became more pronounced as Mira grew increasingly distant. She began having frequent headaches, claiming exhaustion from her studies and job search. Their intimate moments became rare, and when they did occur, Mira seemed distracted, going through the motions without the genuine warmth she had shown earlier. William tried to be understanding, remembering how overwhelming Margaret had found major life changes, but the rejection stung more deeply than he wanted to admit. One evening, while Mira was supposedly at the library, William decided to surprise her by picking her up and taking her to dinner at the Indian restaurant she had mentioned wanting to try. When he arrived at the library, the staff informed him that no one matching Mira's description had been there that day. Confused and concerned, he drove home to find Mira already there, claiming she had returned early because she wasn't feeling well. When he mentioned his visit to the library, she seemed flustered, quickly explaining that she had actually gone to a different branch across town. The lies were small at first, but they began accumulating like drops of water that would eventually flood his trust. William found himself questioning details that had never seemed important before. Why she never received mail from India, why she had no photos of friends from her previous life, why she seemed so knowledgeable about Canadian immigration procedures for someone who claimed to be experiencing the process for the first time. His children's earlier warnings began echoing in his mind, though he pushed them away, not wanting to believe that the happiness he had found could be built on deception. As winter approached, William noticed that Mira's mood seemed to lift considerably whenever she received certain phone calls or text messages. She would become animated and excited, speaking in hushed, rapid Hindi that excluded him from whatever joy she was experiencing. When he asked about these conversations, she would give vague explanations about good news from home or friends sharing happy updates. But William began to sense that her happiness had nothing to do with their life together, and everything to do with something, or someone, else entirely. The foundation of trust that had built their relationship was developing cracks that would soon become irreparable fractures. The discovery that would shatter William's world came on a cold February morning when Mira rushed out for what she claimed was an urgent doctor's appointment. In her haste, she left her laptop open on the kitchen table, something that had never happened before. William stared at the glowing screen for several minutes, wrestling with his conscience. Margaret had always trusted him completely, and he had never violated her privacy in 32 years of marriage. But the accumulating lies and strange behavior had pushed him beyond the boundaries of polite trust. The laptop displayed her email inbox, and William's heart sank as he scanned the subject lines. Mixed among routine messages were emails with headers that made his blood run cold. Permanent residency application update, document verification complete, and most damning of all, marriage documentation for immigration purposes. These emails were dated weeks before they had even begun talking about marriage, some even predating their first video call. With trembling fingers, William opened the immigration correspondence. The emails revealed a carefully orchestrated plan that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with obtaining Canadian citizenship. Mira had been working with an immigration consultant for over a year, specifically seeking a Canadian citizen willing to enter into a marriage of convenience. The consultant's emails refer to William by code number rather than his name, describing him as Target 23, elderly widower, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable. The trail of emails painted a picture of calculated deception that made William physically ill. There were discussions about the optimal timing for marriage, strategies for convincing immigration officials that their relationship was genuine, and even coaching on how to behave during interviews. One email chain included detailed instructions on maintaining the appearance of affection and managing the emotional expectations of the Canadian spouse. William realized that every tender moment, every loving gesture, every intimate conversation had been performed according to a script designed to manipulate his loneliness. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Buried deeper in her email history, William found ongoing correspondence with someone named Arjun Malhotra in Mumbai. The tone of these messages was completely different from anything Mira had ever shared with William. These emails were filled with genuine affection, future plans, and intimate details about their relationship that had apparently been continuing throughout her marriage to William. Arjun wrote about missing her, about counting the days until she could bring him to Canada, and about their plans to start a family together once her permanent residency was secured. Mira's responses to Arjun revealed her true feelings with devastating clarity. She wrote about enduring William's old man's touch, about how disgusting she found their physical intimacy, and about how she counted the minutes until she could escape his presence. She described their marriage as the price I must pay for our future together, and referred to William as my stepping stone to Canada. The casual cruelty of her words hit William like physical blows, each sentence destroying another piece of the happiness he thought they had built together. The email trail showed that Mira had been planning to divorce William as soon as her permanent residency was approved, which according to the immigration consultant's timeline would be within the next 6 months. She and Arjun had already begun discussing how to bring him to Canada as her spouse, with Mira planning to claim that her marriage to William had been a mistake, a rushed decision she regretted. They had even researched Canadian divorce laws and property division, calculating how much of William's assets Mira might be entitled to claim. William's hands shook as he read message after message that revealed the depth of the conspiracy against him. Mira had shared details about his daily routines, his financial situation, even his medication schedule with Arjun, as if William were an object to be studied rather than a human being deserving of basic respect. They laughed about his attempts to learn about Indian culture, mocked his gifts and gestures of affection, and counted down the days until their charade could end. The realization that he had been living a complete lie for months sent William into a state of shock that bordered on dissociation. Every memory of their time together was now contaminated by the knowledge of her deception. Her laughter had been fake, her kisses had been calculated, and her tears of joy at the airport had been a performance worthy of an Academy Award. The woman he had fallen in love with had never existed. She was a character created specifically to exploit his vulnerability and loneliness. William found himself remembering Margaret's genuine love, the authentic warmth that had sustained him through decades of marriage, and the contrast with Mira's manufactured affection felt like a desecration of everything he had held sacred about relationships. He had given this woman his trust, his home, his financial security, and his heart, only to discover that she viewed him as nothing more than a means to an end. As he heard Mira's car pulling into the driveway, William quickly closed the laptop and tried to compose himself. But the knowledge burning inside him was too powerful to contain. When she walked through the door with her usual smile and greeting, asking about his morning as if she genuinely cared, William felt something dark and primal stirring within him. The rage building in his chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not just anger at being deceived, but fury at having his capacity for love turned into a weapon against him. Mira continued her performance throughout the day, preparing his lunch, asking about his plans, even suggesting they watch a movie together that evening. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, now felt like another knife twisted in the wound of his humiliation. William realized that confronting her with the evidence would only result in more lies, more manipulation, and possibly an acceleration of her plan to destroy him financially and emotionally. As night fell and Mira prepared for bed with the same routine intimacy that had once comforted him, William lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind consumed with images of revenge and justice. The woman sleeping beside him had stolen months of his life, violated his trust in the most fundamental way possible, and planned to discard him like trash once she had extracted everything useful from their relationship. The man who had once been content with simple companionship was rapidly becoming someone capable of ensuring that Mira's carefully laid plans would never come to fruition. William spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled fury, watching Mira perform her role as the loving wife while knowing the truth about her intentions. Every smile felt like a slap, every touch like a violation. He found himself studying her face during their conversations, searching for cracks in her performance, amazed at how effortlessly she maintained the deception. When she asked why he seemed quiet, he claimed to be tired from poor sleep, which wasn't entirely a lie. His nights were consumed by dark fantasies of confrontation and revenge. The breaking point came on Friday evening, when Mira received a video call that she thought William couldn't see. He was in his workshop, supposedly organizing tools, but the house's open layout allowed him to observe her through the doorway. She was laughing with genuine joy, her face animated in a way he had never seen during their months together. She spoke in Hindi, but her body language told the story. This was a woman in love, sharing intimate moments with someone who actually mattered to her. William crept closer, positioning himself where he could see her laptop screen. The man on the video call was young and handsome, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of easy smile that William remembered having 40 years ago. This had to be Arjun. William watched as Mira blew kisses at the screen, touched her lips when Arjun apparently did the same, and whispered words that even without translation clearly carried more affection than she had ever shown her husband. When the call ended, Mira sat for a moment staring at the blank screen with the expression of profound sadness. Then, as if flipping a switch, she rearranged her features into the pleasant mask she wore around William and called out, "Honey, dinner is almost ready." The transformation was so complete, so coldly professional, that William felt something fundamental break inside his chest. During dinner, Mira chatted about her day, mentioning a job interview she claimed to have had at a local retail store. She asked about his workshop project, listened to his responses with apparent interest, and even reached across the table to squeeze his hand affectionately. William played his part, responding to her questions and complimenting her cooking, but inside he was planning her destruction with the same methodical precision she had used to plan his. That night, after Mira fell asleep, William returned to her laptop. He screenshotted the most damning emails, printed copies of her correspondence with both the immigration consultant and Arjun, and documented the timeline of her deception. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Armed with this proof, William could have exposed her to immigration authorities, had her deported, and salvaged what remained of his dignity. But exposure felt inadequate for the magnitude of her betrayal. William began following Mira during her supposed job interviews and English classes. What he discovered completed the picture of her deception. She spent her afternoons at an internet cafe, video calling Arjun and planning their future life together. She visited immigration lawyers, not to complete her own paperwork, but to research the fastest way to bring Arjun to Canada once she achieved permanent residency. She even met with a realtor, inquiring about smaller apartments she could afford after divorcing William and claiming her share of his assets. The surveillance revealed that Mira had built an entire parallel life that excluded him completely. She had made friends in the Indian community who knew nothing about her marriage, presenting herself as a single woman navigating immigration independently. She had opened a separate bank account using William's address, but had never mentioned it to him. Most devastating of all, she had been taking photos of his house, his possessions, and even his financial documents, sending them to Arjun with calculations of their combined worth. On the night William decided to end the charade, Mira returned home particularly excited about something. She was more affectionate than usual, making his favorite dessert and suggesting they watch an old movie together. Her performance was flawless, but William could see through every gesture now. She was probably celebrating some milestone in her immigration process, another step closer to discarding him and starting her real life with Arjun. As they sat on the couch together, Mira's head resting on his shoulder in a mockery of intimacy, William made his decision. Tomorrow, he would confront her with the evidence. He would force her to admit the truth about everything. The fake marriage, her real relationship, her plans to destroy him financially and emotionally. And then, depending on how she responded, he would decide whether she deserved mercy or something far more permanent. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as William stared down at the woman who had weaponized his loneliness against him. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other would be facing consequences that neither had imagined when they first exchanged messages on that dating website. Mira stirred in her sleep, unconsciously moving closer to him, and William felt his hatred crystallize into something cold and final. She had chosen to play a dangerous game with a man who had nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, she would learn that some deceptions carry a price that cannot be paid with mere apologies or explanations. The peaceful suburban house held its secrets for one final night, while outside, the February wind howled like a warning of the violence that was coming. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the darkness that had settled in William's heart. He had spent the night awake, arranging the printed emails and screenshots on his kitchen table like evidence in a courtroom. Each document represented another layer of Mira's betrayal, another nail in the coffin of their fraudulent marriage. When she emerged from their bedroom, stretching and yawning with a performance of domestic contentment, William was waiting for her. "Good morning, honey," Mira said, moving to kiss his cheek as she had every morning for months. "You're up early today." William didn't respond, simply gestured toward the table where the evidence lay spread out like a map of her deception. Mira's smile faltered as her eyes took in the printed emails, the immigration documents, the screenshots of her video calls with Arjun. The color drained from her face, but she quickly attempted to recover. "William, what is all this?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of confused innocence that might have fooled him months earlier. "Why do you have my private emails?" Her attempt to shift blame and maintain the deception only fueled his rage further. After everything he had discovered, she was still lying to his face, still trying to manipulate him with false innocence. "Sit down, Mira," William said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that made her comply immediately. "Or should I call you by the name Arjun uses? The woman who's been planning our divorce since before our wedding." He picked up one of the printed emails and began reading her own words back to her. "I can barely stand his touch, but it will all be worth it when you're here with me in Canada." Mira's facade finally cracked under the weight of undeniable evidence. "You had no right to read my private correspondence," she said, anger replacing her fake sweetness. "Those emails are taken out of context. You don't understand the pressure I'm under from my family, the expectations." William cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Context? The context is that you've been planning to destroy my life from the moment you first messaged me. The confrontation escalated as William read more excerpts from her emails, each revelation hitting her like a physical blow. Mira tried several different strategies, claiming the emails were old and irrelevant, insisting that her feelings had changed since arriving in Canada, even attempting to seduce him with the same false affection that had fooled him for months. Nothing worked. William had seen too much, understood too completely how thoroughly she had deceived him. "I gave you everything," William said, his voice breaking with emotion. "My home, my trust, my love. I thought Margaret's death had left me with nothing, but you've shown me what having nothing really means." Mira's attempts at explanation became more desperate as she realized that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. She began making promises. She would end things with Arjun. She would cancel her immigration plans. She would become the wife he wanted her to be. "You want to know what hurts the most?" William continued, standing up and moving toward her. "It's not just that you lied about loving me. It's that you made me believe I could be loved again. You took the last hope I had for happiness and turned it into a weapon against me." Mira backed away from him, suddenly recognizing something dangerous in his expression. "William, please, we can work this out," she pleaded. "I'll make it up to you. I'll be a real wife to you. Just give me another chance." Her words only enraged him further. Even now, faced with the complete exposure of her deception, she was still lying, still trying to manipulate him. The realization that she would never tell him the truth, never show him genuine remorse, pushed him beyond the edge of reason. The heavy brass candlestick from Margaret's collection sat on the mantel, just as it had every day since her death. William had dusted it countless times, remembering how Margaret had loved its intricate design, how she had saved money for months to buy it during their early marriage. Now it would serve a different purpose. As Mira continued her desperate pleas, William's hand closed around the familiar weight of the metal. The first blow silenced her lies forever. The second ensured that she would never hurt anyone the way she had hurt him. When the rage finally subsided, the house fell into the same silence it had held before Mira's arrival. But now that silence was filled with something far darker than loneliness. William sat beside Mira's body for hours, staring at the woman who had promised him salvation but delivered damnation instead. When the neighbors noticed he hadn't brought in his newspaper and called police for a welfare check, they found him still sitting there, covered in blood, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. The trial that followed captivated the nation. The prosecution painted William as a cold-blooded killer who murdered his young wife in a fit of jealous rage. The defense argued that he was a victim of an elaborate immigration scam, driven to temporary insanity by the discovery of his wife's comprehensive deception. The jury heard testimony about Mira's calculated manipulation, her ongoing relationship with Arjun, and her plans to abandon William once she achieved permanent residency. But sympathy for William's situation couldn't excuse the brutality of his response. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on charges of second-degree murder. William was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. As he was led away in shackles, both families wept. Mira's parents in India, who had known nothing of their daughter's deception, and William's children, who struggled to reconcile the gentle father they remembered with the killer he had become. The case sparked national conversations about immigration fraud, online dating safety, and the vulnerability of elderly people seeking companionship. Immigration officials tightened procedures for marriage-based applications, and dating websites began implementing better verification systems. In his prison cell, William spends his days replaying the choices that led to that final, irreversible moment. He had wanted love, companionship, and a second chance at happiness. Instead, he found deception, manipulation, and ultimately became a killer himself. The woman he thought would save him from loneliness had instead ensured he would spend his remaining years in the ultimate isolation of a prison cell. Margaret's brass candlestick, once a symbol of their genuine love, had become the instrument that ended any possibility of William ever knowing real love again. In trying to punish Mira for her deception, he had destroyed the last remnants of the decent man he had once been, leaving behind only the memory of a tragedy that could have been prevented with honesty, communication, and the courage to walk away from a lie.